You think you know Sigmund Freud, right? The father of psychoanalysis, the guy who gave us the ego, the id, all that stuff. But what if I told you that the entire foundation of his work was built on a secret blueprint? A blueprint that had nothing to do with psychology, but everything to do with the hard, mechanical physics of the 19th century.
So let's just dive right into that question, because the answer could totally change how you see one of the most influential thinkers of all time. We're going to uncover how a forgotten group of scientists basically hardwired Freud's brain and secretly shaped the entire field of therapy. Okay, let's start with something you've probably heard of, the pleasure principle. You know, the idea that our minds are constantly trying to get rid of tension and find a nice, stable, happy place. Sounds purely psychological, doesn't it? Well, hang on to that thought, because that right there, that's our first clue. To really crack this case, we have to go back in time, way back, before Freud was the famous Freud. We need to meet the people who wrote the secret code he would follow for the rest of his life. And look, this wasn't some stuffy academic club. These guys were rebels, scientific revolutionaries who were dead set on tearing down all the old mystical ideas about life and building something new from the ground up. So their mission, the creed of this group called the Helmholtz School, was radical and simple. First, they threw out this popular idea of vitalism, this notion that living things have some kind of special, magical life force. Nope. To them, a person was just a machine. A very complex machine, sure, but a machine nonetheless, totally governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. And they were not messing around. This quote just says it all. They took a solemn oath to this idea. And see that name there? Brücke? Ernst Brücke? Remember that name, because he was a key player in this movement, and he was about to become the single most important person in young Sigmund Freud's world. So here's the thing you absolutely have to get. Before Freud ever talked about a single dream, he was trained as a hard-nosed, by-the-book, materialist scientist. He wasn't just influenced by this school of thought, he was forged in it. We're not talking about a brief internship either. For 6 whole years, from 1876 to 1882, Freud was a dedicated student in Ernst Brücke's physiology lab. This was a deep dive, a period where he completely absorbed his mentor's worldview. And get this, he was really good at it. This wasn't just busy work. Freud was a serious neurologist. He was publishing papers proving that the nerve cells in a fish and the nerve cells in a human were basically built from the same blueprint. He was all in on Brücke's vision of life as a machine. But you know, it went deeper than just an education. Freud's own words tell you everything. Brücke wasn't just a boss, he was a model, an idol. This whole scientific creed wasn't just a set of ideas for Freud. It was a deeply personal, almost emotional commitment. So armed with this rock-solid materialist worldview, Freud decides he's going to do something incredibly ambitious. He sets out to create a complete psychology based entirely on the physics of the brain. And you can just feel the pressure he was under. His collaborator, Joseph Breuer, was fine with using psychological language. But Freud was almost apologetic about it. He felt like he needed a serious stamp of science. He was desperate to take the messy world of human emotion and translate it into the clean, precise language of neurology that Brücke had taught him. He called it his project for a scientific psychology, and the goal was just massive. He wanted to explain things like memory, pain, even consciousness, as nothing more than quantities of energy moving between neurons. The dream was to make psychology as predictable and reliable as physics. But it didn't work. It was a brilliant attempt, for sure, but in the end, it was a spectacular failure. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't bridge that huge gap between the mechanics of the brain and the feeling of being human. So he abandoned it. The whole thing just sat in a drawer, unpublished. So you'd think, okay, story's over, right? Failed project, end of chapter. But no, not even close. Because Freud didn't throw the ideas away, he just gave them a makeover. And this right here, this is where we find the smoking gun. Okay, check this out. This is the main idea from his failed project. He called it the principle of inertia. It's pure physiology. The nervous system is a machine that always wants to get rid of extra energy and get back to a state of rest. Simple enough? Now, look at this. The famous pleasure principle from psychoanalysis. The mind tries to discharge psychic energy to reduce unpleasure and get back to a stable state. It is the exact same concept. The logic is identical. He basically just did a find and replace, swapping nervous system for mind and quantity of energy for tension.
And that's it. That's the secret. Psychoanalysis wasn't some huge break from his past as a neurologist. Psychoanalysis is his neurology, just wearing a different costume. He took that whole mechanical framework he learned from Brücke and just pasted it onto the mind. And I mean, this influence wasn't some minor detail. It was everything. It was the entire operating system. You could say Brücke's ghost was haunting every single aspect of Freud's work for the rest of his life. Seriously, once you see it everywhere. The idea that if you repress an emotion, that energy doesn't just disappear, it pops up somewhere else as a symptom, that's the law of conservation of energy, straight out of a physics textbook. Or the belief that the mind and brain are just two sides of the same coin, which gave him the confidence to study psychology in the first place. Even the idea that there's no real difference between normal and abnormal, just a different amount of energy, that is pure Brücke. And he never, ever lost that faith. Even late in his life, Freud was convinced that someday science would get good enough to find the physical, neurological proof for everything he was talking about. He always saw himself as a biologist of the mind, just waiting for the technology to catch up. And if you need one last final piece of evidence to show just how deep this connection ran, it's this. Freud felt that naming a child was a profoundly important act. And of his 6 kids, he named his 3rd son, Ernst, in honor of his mentor, Ernst Brücke, the man who gave him his entire scientific soul. So that brings us to the big final question. If the very foundation of Freud's theory is basically a metaphor for a 19th century steam engine, all about pressure, energy, and release, what does that mean for how we use his ideas today, in the age of neuroscience? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other ghosts from the past are still hiding in the machines of our modern ideas?